Today, I'm joined by Kevin Eikenberry. Kevin is the Chief Potential Officer of the Kevin Eikenberry Group, a leadership and learning company based in Indianapolis, Indiana, with a team across the United States. He has spent over 30 years helping global organizations and leaders become more effective. He's been ranked as one of the most influential thinkers on leadership over the last 4 years. His blog and podcast, the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, are among the most popular on the subject of leadership. Kevin's latest book, Flexible Leadership: Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence, helps leaders understand how to flex their leadership style in different situations. And I'm excited to have him on the program to learn from his expertise. So, Kevin, welcome to the show.
John, thanks for having me.
It's good to meet you. And again, congratulations on your long success with your podcast. You've been doing it a long time. You have more than 500 episodes. So, my hat's off to you for just sticking to it and being consistent.
Well, being consistent. We're going to talk about consistent versus flexible, I'm
Right.
sure in a second. But being consistent is, showing up is
Yeah.
a big part of success, right? So when we decided to start doing a show, we said we're not going to do it unless we're going to stay with it, and that's what we've done.
Well,
We've made adjustments obviously over time, but for the most part, it's not all that different from when we started.
I
Hopefully
love it.
better.
Yeah, yeah. I love it. I just love it because you started with something and you kept it going, and again, over 500 episodes. So congratulations. That's great. Great news.
Thanks.
Well, let's get into the new book's called Flexible Leadership. So that's kind of an exciting topic. And as I mentioned before we press record, I'm excited to talk about it. So what was the idea behind Flexible Leadership? Why did you write this book?
Well, a couple things. First of all, I've been doing this work. You said nice things about me in the open, and I've been doing this work for a long time. And what I've found is that there are some tensions that we need to understand and deal with as leaders. And it fundamentally comes down to this question, John. When I ask leaders this question, I'll ask all of you who are watching or listening this: are you leading the same way you were 5 years ago?
Mm.
And I would say if you are, that's a problem because the world's changing. And if the world is not changing to be more in line with the way you've led during that time. Like it's just not a bet that I'd take, right? So uh, the reality is in a changing world, we have to be ready and willing to flex intelligently and intentionally. And this book, I think, helps people think about that in ways that maybe they've not thought about before.
I love it. I think you mentioned something that's really important is that the world has changed quite a bit, and I think that I think if we haven't changed or adjusted our leadership style, or our methods to be successful, especially younger generations coming in, they're motivated differently. How do you motivate the younger people? There's a lot of things that we've had to do in the recent years, and I think you're right. To your point, if we're static and we're not growing and we're not becoming better, then I think we're missing out, and then we're going to be just like anything else, will be outdated in no time if we're not continually working on ourselves. But let's why now though? Why did you feel like this is the time that we have to talk about flexible leadership?
Well, because the world is more uncertain than ever,
Mhm.
right? And that's in the subtitle, Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. And so the the fact that there is so much uncertainty challenges us to be ready to flex and adjust when necessary. And in a world that, well, let's just go back, say, I don't know, 30 years. I know some of you who are listening, like I was in elementary school. I get that. But here's the thing. Um, the reality is that much more of the work that we did even 10 years ago, far more of it what I would call a clear context. Like there were clear cause and effect. There we knew what someone knew the information. Probably we as the leader knew what was necessary, and so it even made sense that we probably lived in a world of a little closer to command and control type of leadership. And while that gets a really bad name a lot of the times now, the reality is when the context is that clear, there's really not necessarily anything wrong with it at the core. And yet the world now is more complicated and complex. There's even times that we find ourselves in chaos, and it's those four things that we introduce in the book using the good work of others called the Kevin framework that says it's the map of where we're at. Like if I put you out in the wilderness and say, get out, there's a way out of here, the thing that you want most is a map.
Hmm.
People say they want their phone. I say there's no signal. So you want a map, right? And the Kinevin framework is the map, the map of the context of our situation. And in a world where the context is more complicated and complex than ever, we need to have new ways to lead and think about leading in the moment. And that means having only one approach doesn't serve us best.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the framework, and so let's talk to us a little bit about, like, when is it time to flex? When is it time to stay with our default leadership style? What are sort of the triggers to where we want to start making adjustments to our leadership style?
Yeah, so there's two things I want to go to right there.
Yeah,
One is the word style. I'll come back to that, but I want to because a lot of times people will say, "But Kevin, aren't I supposed to be consistent?"
yeah,
Like, don't people want to know what they're getting with me as a leader? And I say,
yeah.
yes, and. And in
Hmm.
fact, this idea of yes and or both and is an important part of this whole conversation. So let's take an example. Everyone in your mind's eye right now, get a picture of a mature tree. That mature tree is stable and strong and consistent. It isn't going anywhere. Like it's deeply rooted. And yet, if you look at it a little more closely, even in the very lightest of breezes, it's flexing
Hmm.
too. So it's consistent and flexible both. Our world is much more of a both and world than an either or world. And we we were in school learning things that were about, well, there's a single right answer. And what I'm suggesting is there's not a single right answer. There's an answer that might give us a better chance, better set of odds given our current context. So we should be consistent in our values, in our purpose, in our why, and we should be flexible in our how. How
Hmm.
we lead we must be willing to flex in a world that's changing. So now the second thing, you use the word style. And so I want to talk about style for a second. So people like you and I that have been helping leaders for a very long time, people smarter than me, I don't know about smarter than you, John, but smarter than me, have built all these models to help us understand our style. And they're well-meaning and they're useful and they're helpful until they're not. And when they become unhelpful is when we take a style, which is a simplified model of a complex world, and then we further simplify it by saying, "Oh, this is who I am."
Hmm.
So understanding our natural tendencies and auto responses is helpful, but labeling ourselves as that being our identity is absolutely not helpful. So knowing our natural tendencies is excellent. Knowing what we would do without any other information or without intentionality is useful. And it's not always going to be most effective. So we've got to be ready and willing to change and flex, not on our why, but on our how.
Hmm, interesting. It makes me think a little bit about, we talked about before I press record, I was a submarine officer before I got into the corporate world. And there were, like, most days, the leadership was, we worked together with our sailors to get things done. It was a very collaborative process. But when things hit the fan, right, we went to command and control, and everybody knew their duties, and so we switched gears very quickly when the enemy was about, and we had things that we had to do that were dangerous. Things We shifted very quickly into that mode, and
Based on using my language, based on the context. The context is now different, and
yeah,
so what will serve us all best is different.
yeah, yeah. So, and what was interesting is that, to your point, nothing changed. Like, our values were the same. The things we believe in, the core was the same, right? But we shifted our style in that moment because it was needed, right? So you can't have collaboration when there's an incoming torpedo, right? There's command and control at that point. And I find,
Someone's got to be in charge, take
yeah,
charge, make decisions,
yeah,
even if they're wrong. Because at that point, we need someone to say, here's what the direction we're going to go, and everyone else is going to say, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am. And that's not just a military
right,
model. That's probably the clearest model we can use to talk about it. But ultimately, So let me just, can I take it a little step further than that? Like
Yeah,
your
please.
example is a perfect example of why, when, and when we should shift. Too often, though, leaders treat things, and so I would say that those are moments of, in our model, our framework of chaos.
Hmm.
And what I would suggest is that we treat too many things as chaos when they're really just complex.
I
And
agree.
so we have too many leaders that shift gears or go to their natural preference of command and control when there's complexity. When there's complexity, we need to get way more information and we got to try stuff rather than someone just saying, "Here we go."
Hmm. Interesting. So yeah, so the circumstance really dictates the style or the approach. I guess let me say the approach, right?
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, the how of leading, if you want to call
The
it that.
how of leading. Yeah. So what are some other maybe situations where you would, where something has shifted and we have to take a look at maybe flexing that leadership approach.
Well, let me talk about what we call the overall flexible leadership approach first. So there's
Okay.
three components to it, and we've talked about two. We haven't really talked about the third, at least not
Okay.
directly. So the three parts of the formula, if you will, are intention plus context plus flexors. And we haven't talked about flexors yet, and we haven't talked enough about intention. So let me say a little bit more about intention. Intention means that we have to be aware that if we just do our natural tendency, we're not going to flex, right? If we just take our auto response or our learned habits, we're not going to flex. So we have to recognize the need and the desire to move past our identity and past our habits. We have to look at the context as we've been talking about. And then the last part is, okay, given that context, how do we flex? And this is where we call the flexors. So let me just give you an example of one. There's a bunch of them in the book, but really for the purpose of our conversation, John, the best thing to do is probably just share an example, right? So all of you who are watching or listening, whether you're in your fifth leadership role or your first one, you probably remember when you were promoted into a leadership role. And you got promoted because you were really good at doing stuff, right? You were a subject matter expert, you were highly productive, and because you were the best accountant, you became the accounting manager. Because you were the best salesperson, you became the sales manager. We all recognize that. That's how it seems to work, right? And so we were rewarded for being doers.
Hmm.
And yet, when we move into a leadership role, we need to be able to do what? Let go of the doing and to delegate, right? We all know that. So I would frame those on a flexor, right? One end of the flexor is do, the other end is delegate. Now, this is a both and world. So are there times when we should take action? Yes. Are there times when we should delegate? Yes. Chances are you have a natural approach. You have a natural tendency that leans you one direction on this flexor or the other, right? Who all of you who are listening can say, well, yeah, I lean more this way or that way. Not what you want to do, but what you actually do. What's your natural tendency? And that when we think then about our context, to say, well, in this moment, like let's just say that the team is buried in work and we're falling further behind. Maybe in that moment, the best thing for you to do is roll up your sleeves and go to work.
Hmm.
Maybe,
Yeah.
right? Um, but if you stay there, like the way I would describe it, if you look at the ends of the flexor, the far ends are rarely the right answer.
Hmm.
The best answers are somewhere in the tension between the two. And so to simply say leaders need to be better delegators, that's a fair statement. But to say that leaders should only ever delegate is a less than optimum statement because it depends, right? And the way to think about these flexors is as simple as this. It's that phrase, it depends. Because if you have ever had someone ask you a question as a leader and you had an immediate response, but you stopped and said, well, it depends.
Hmm.
What we should do depends. What does it depend on? There's context. And then you make a decision about what we should do, even it wouldn't be what I would necessarily want to do or naturally do. Like, I believe all of us can do this. I think I just proved that all of us have done it. But the asking of the or the saying of the it depends is the trigger to say, well, let's look at this a little more carefully, right?
Yeah. Well, you're touching on something that I've even actually written about, the idea of balance, because I think, for example, we take a flexor. Say if one of the flexors is management involvement, right? How involved are you? The extreme on one is the micromanager. You're too involved, right? So you're trying to control every aspect of your people, right?
Yep.
And then the other extreme is you're not involved at all. You're what I call an absent manager. You're nowhere to be found. So where the feeling when you have a micromanager as a person, you feel like that person doesn't trust me because they're trying to control everything. And on the other end, they feel like the person doesn't care because they're nowhere to be found. They're not
Yep.
so from just that flexor of management involvement, you can see the extremes are bad, right? But you can see where there are times when you need to be more involved, right? And there are times when you can be less involved. And so is this an example of like a flexor where
Yeah.
you might want to have to adjust depending on the circumstance?
Absolutely. Like my natural tendency might be on the I don't want to be in I want to let people do the work. I want to let them do
Right,
it.
right.
Right. And there may be times when the expectations I haven't made the expectations clear or they're not meeting those expectations or whatever, and I need to get more involved. Right.
Mm,
And so your example is a really good one because the far ends are rarely the right answer. Here's another example. Uh, Changing everything or changing a lot right away, not living in the status quo.
yeah,
Like the ends of those are both ineffective.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the tension between them matters, and the context tells us which direction we should move, right? Like if things are really challenging and there are all sorts of issues, we may need to lean more toward more change. But if there's been a lot going on and we need to let things settle in, even if we know there's more things we want to change, right now is not the best time to do it.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So it's another example of thinking about you use the word balance. I like to use the word tension. The tension between I mean, we're not really different, except I like the idea of the tension between them because uh, it's recognizing that both matter. The
Mm,
problem with balance is like I'm trying to find the perfect place. Like,
yeah,
is the middle the perfect place? No, not necessarily most of the
yeah.
time, right? It's which direction should I be leaning? Which of these tensions makes will have a bigger impact? Ultimately, what we're trying to do is improve our odds
Mm,
because everything we do as a leader is influence, right? We can influence others, we can influence outcomes. Don't have control of either one. So what we're really trying to do is improve our odds of getting better outcomes.
mm, yeah. Well, does it mean that a leader needs to be uh well, I would tell two things. One is self-aware, first of all, and the second one have a large enough amount of empathy to sort of sense where they need to make the shift and where they need to make the adjustment. So is that an important element of this?
There's no doubt. For us to be more effective leaders, whether you want to think about flexible leadership or whatever other model or approach that you want to take, we have to become more self-aware. That's a big part of our growth as leaders. As we
Mm,
become better leaders, we become better humans and vice versa. And a
mm,
big part of being a more effective human is become more self-aware. Like where are our blind spots? Um, when do we lean into things that don't necessarily serve us? What are the approaches that we have used in the past that maybe have served us, but we over index on them? All of those sorts of things. So I don't think there's any question that working on our self-awareness, which is another reason why we need people to speak into our lives as leaders, right? As coaches, as podcasts that we listen to, whatever those things are. We need people that can speak into us, that can pour into us, that can give us feedback, that can help us see what we don't see. And when we have those things, and when we're willing to listen to that feedback, we have the chance to become far more effective.
mm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You also talk about mindset. So where does mindset fit into the world of flexible leadership?
So a lot of what we've talked about so far has really been mindset, right?
Hmm.
So the idea that it's not an either or right or wrong
Okay.
answer world, but rather it's a both and world. The mindset that says my natural tendencies, while useful, are not my identity. So in what I would say to you and what we do in all of our work with leaders is that mindset has to come before skills because I can teach anybody a skill, but if it doesn't match up with how they see the world, they're
Hmm.
not going to act on it. We got no shot. Like if we don't get the mindset right, like I could teach everybody here all about flexors, but if you don't understand some of what we've been talking about there being a world full of gray and a world full of both and, then there's no chance that you will even do anything with the idea of flexors because it just doesn't meet to your worldview. So mindset has to align with skill set. And once we have those two, the last one where the rubber really meets the road is habit set, right?
Yeah.
We can have people listen to this podcast and say, yeah, I'm going to go do something. And you could learn a skill here. Awesome. But until you go do it, it doesn't matter, right? Mindset, skill set, habit set.
Hmm. Yeah, habit says very interesting. We were talking about the fact that you have so many episodes in your podcast, but it's because you've set the right habits, right? And you're consistent with it. And you show up, like you said, you show up every day and you make sure that you accomplish something. So how do we become better at our habits? And in other words, you said mindset, skill set, and then habit set. How do we get better at having good habits and following through with those?
Well, the first thing is we have to recognize the habits that are serving us and the ones that aren't,
Mm,
right? And
okay.
the whole idea of this model that I've talked about starts with intention, which means being intentional as opposed to just living on autopilot, right? So
Okay.
habits are one of the most powerful things in our world, right? They serve us and some of them serve us and some of them don't. So we have to recognize the ones that serve us and the ones that don't. And then we have to start to think about, okay, what serves me better? And when is the moment that I ask myself those questions? Like what's the trigger moment? And the trigger moment is that moment of, well, it depends,
Mm,
as an example, right? That the moment I say in my out loud or I say in my head, it depends, I'm telling myself, stop on auto and let's think about this just a little bit more. That's a new habit. So being willing to do that is a way to start to change the habit. Like
mm,
all of us have all sorts of habits that we know serve us and some that we know don't. And the first step is figuring out which ones do and which ones don't. And then the second thing is we don't try to stop doing something, we try to replace it. So like
yeah.
what am I going to do instead of
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. It's interesting because when you talk about that, one of the things I think about is a habit I have is I've been doing manufacturing for over 30 years, right? So I've seen a lot of things and I have a lot of young employees. And so they'll come to me with a problem. And my natural habit is to help them solve the problem, right? Because I know the answer because I've seen it before. But I've created a new habit to let them try to solve the problem. What do you think? How do you think we should approach this?
Yep.
Um,
Because if you keep answering, they're going to
yes,
keep asking and they're not going to learn anything,
right,
right?
right. And they need the opportunity to learn, just like I learned by making some mistakes and figuring it out on their own. They're going to learn more than if I try to solve the problem. So I had to make a new habit of trying to say, what do you think? And not try to solve the problem. And so in a lot of cases, their solution may not be the one I would choose, but I think that's just as important, right? Because it gives them a learning opportunity. And those are really important for young leaders.
Not it might not be the one we would choose, but it might work just fine. And that's the other, we got to be willing to let go of that, right?
Yes,
So when
yes,
people come with the question, the rather than saying here's what we should do, rather than answering what would you do? What have you already tried? What have you considered? What would you do if I was on vacation? Like there's
yes,
17 ways to ask the question, but all of them are getting them involved in it to learn. And sometimes, here's the other thing. Sometimes we've been the leader a long time, and the work has changed, and the ways we'd have done it might not be the only way or even the best way anymore. And
Yeah.
so because perhaps the context isn't as clear as we think it is, it might be more complicated or
Yeah.
complex. And so getting that perspective from them is incredibly valuable, not just for the learning for them and the empowerment for them, but also we may get better answers.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you say that because I think it's George Patton who said, let people surprise you with the results and give them that opportunity to do that. And I had a young plant manager that I sort of gave him full control and we blew out the production numbers and we set records and but he did it in a way that I wouldn't have done it. And at the end, his name is Nate, and I was like Nate the Great. And that's why I started calling him Nate the Great because he had a different approach. It wouldn't have been my approach. And I think he did better than I would have done. So, I think it was like one of those great things where I sort of let go and let him surprise me with the results. And it turned out to be much better than what I would have done.
One of the profound lessons for us as leaders is to realize there's more than one way to do it well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And the world and leadership itself is far too complex for there to be only a single right answer. There just isn't.
Yeah.
And so what we're trying to do is use the kinds of ideas that we've talked about today, John, to improve our odds across the wide range of situations we find ourselves in.
Mm, I like that. I like that a lot. So what other things would people take away from this book when they go through it?
Well, the subtitle, I think, tells it. Navigate uncertainty and lead with confidence. I think we are in uncertain times, and the ideas that we've talked about and others in the book will help you navigate that better for yourself and for your team.
Mm,
And when you have the kinds of tools in your tool belt to help you do that, you can be more confident even in the face of uncertainty. And so I think the subtitle of the book really tells the story of what I'm trying to help people do in these times that we lead in today.
oh, that's fantastic. Well, what final message would you like to leave with our listeners?
Um, I will tell you this, that leadership is a opportunity and a responsibility. And leadership is also not a job title.
Mm,
Chances are, if you're listening or watching us, then you are a leader, whether you have the title or whether you don't, because we're only leading when people choose to follow. It's our responsibility and opportunity to make sure that we're leading them to a valuable outcome.
I love it. Such powerful words. Great, great words of wisdom. Kevin, I appreciate that. This has been fantastic. How can our listeners find out more about you and this new book?
Well, I'll give you three things. Number one, you can go to flexibleleadershipbook.com or wherever fine books are sold. And if you go to flexibleleadershipbook.com, though, you can get a free chapter. So that's
Ah,
probably worth it. You can follow me on LinkedIn, or our website is kevineikenberry.com. But if you go to kevineikenberry.com/gift, I'll give you a gift just for coming here. We created a masterclass a number of years ago on how we can build our confidence and the confidence of others, important skill for us as leaders specifically. And that masterclass sells for $79, but you can get it for free by going there now, kevineikenberry.com/gift.
I love it. I love it. We'll have links in the show notes for all of Kevin resources. And listeners, we love free things on this podcast. So we're going to have that link there. Go there, get a free gift. Also we've got a free chapter for the book. But the book is called Flexible Leadership. We're going to put links in the show notes for all of Kevin's resources. There is a picture of it for those who are watching on YouTube. And if you're not watching on YouTube, I encourage you to do that because you get to see our lovely faces when we do this. But yeah, so I encourage you to get the book, Flexible Leadership. If you have a question, if something really stood out from this conversation, please reach out to Kevin. He's the expert. I'm not. I'm here just to introduce this idea. But this is a really important idea, the idea of flexible leadership. I think now more than ever, this is very important. So get the book, follow the links in the show notes below, and reach out to Kevin. So, Kevin, I want to thank you for coming out today, and I thank you for sharing your expertise on this topic.
John, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks again. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.